Hi, everybody, and welcome to the second installment of the Hughes Center educational videos that we're going to do. I'm Brent, and I just want to take you through a few things on our curriculum and go over some things about what addiction and recovery are. I hope you enjoyed our first education video. If you got a chance to watch it, we got some good feedback, so we're going to continue doing this for the foreseeable future, and hopefully we'll get some more positive response out of it. Today, I want to talk to you a little bit about what triggers and maybe how stress can play a part in that. And it's kind of misunderstood. And one of the things that we ask ourselves, or people ask all the time, is why does somebody keep using or drinking? And it's really difficult to understand that. That seems to be probably one of the biggest questions I get asked as a professional is why don't they stop? There's a very wildly successful book written on why, and it's entitled "Why Don't They Just Quit?" And it's funny, the further away we get from our use or drinking, that seems to make sense. I think we easily forget. I was talking with a fellow clinician a while back, and we laughed because we're both in recovery. And the question that we wanted to ask that week, each of us had a specific incident where we wanted to ask the client, well, why don't you just quit? And it seems so simple, but it's so much more difficult than that. So today I kind of want to break down as to why maybe it is so difficult to do. It's interesting that I'm bringing you this video on July 4th weekend. You know, when July 4th, we talk about freedom, and it's about freedom of our country and everything like that. And I won't get into all that, but it is kind of a theme. And so what really happens in the situation of addiction or substance use disorder is that we lose that freedom. I remember when I ultimately, at my fundamental core, knew that I had lost the freedom of choice. And that's a really scary situation to be in. So I know a lot of people suffer from this every day. And many of them don't even know that they lost the freedom of choice. I had lost the freedom of choice long before it had come to my realization that I had. And that was one of the first dominoes that fell. And all of a sudden, I'm like, oh, okay, well, I don't have a choice. That's a scary situation. Well, what now? Well, then I became more willing to ask for help. Well, sometimes people around us or the consequences that we, because of our actions, put us in a position where people will help us identify why we need help or what we need to do. So one of the things I wanted to talk to you about is how does that come about? And so I want to talk to you a little bit about triggers. And I know that some people I've heard in recovery believe that triggers aren't real. Well, I'm here to tell you that the science absolutely proves that they are. Triggers are a real thing, and triggers are not just completely isolated to the individuals that are in recovery or people that are in their addiction. Triggers can go on for anybody, and it could be for any number of things. So I always try to explain that to people that we're not so alone in that aspect. Everybody gets triggered for something somehow, some way at some point in their life. So, for example, one of the things, it's summertime. You get done mowing your yard. If you don't have to be an alcoholic, a lot of men like to, and women like to sit down and they want to have a beer after they mow the yard. There's something about that. Well, on some fundamental level, what has happened is your brain has triggered you a response to go, I need a nice cold beer now. So it's kind of the same response. It's just more powerful when you talk about individuals with substance use disorder. So today I'm going to get into that. So what has happened over a long period of time is our brain has been hijacked. Frontal cortex and the amygdala have all been hijacked. And I know those are like, what is all that? Well, it's just portions of your brain that feed us the reward system that we live with. So everything that we do in life that brings us pleasure, it brings us a reward, right? So dopamine, adrenaline, serotonin, these are all chemicals that the body naturally produces. And so at any given point, when I'm starting to get sober, or I've been sober for a while, I can see something, feel something, hear something, be in a situation, and my brain, without any of my power, any of my knowledge, or any of my doing, it goes, go drink, go use. And that's very difficult for someone to understand. And sometimes it'll be so subtle and so cunning that you won't even see that when it happens. It's just all of a sudden, I know I'm not the only one. I've told people before, it's crazy how early, even before really recovery attempts, I would be trying to go, okay, well, I'm gonna stop, I'm gonna slow down. And my number one goal was to not drink or use. And I'd be like, well, today I'm not gonna drink or use. Today I'm not gonna drink or use. And at the end of the day, I would have ended up drinking or using. And I go, well, how in the heck did that happen? Well, what had happened is my brain has been hijacked. And so all of a sudden, before you know it, you've put in, because that's the only tool set that you have. That's the only toolkit you have, is to use or drink in response to the life around you. So what happens is, all of a sudden, the very front part of your brain says, say I go into a situation, I go into a bar. Well, what happens for a lot of people, say they don't really think that alcohol is their drug of choice. Well, they go into a bar and all of a sudden, they're like, well, I'm not an alcoholic, it's okay. And they go in there and I'm not going to drink. And before they know, the neon starts playing a part on them, and the atmosphere, and they see these images that they've done before, and all of a sudden they have a cold beer in their hand or a cold drink in their hand. They go, how did that happen? Well, what has happened is your brain has taken over, and it has pumped out all sorts of these feel-good drugs that you naturally produce, and it takes over. And so your natural response to that is, I'm going to drink. And ultimately what happens for a lot of us is that we drink and then we use. And so we go, how in the world did that happen? Well, what had happened is your brain took over. Your brain goes on autopilot and it says, let's do this, okay? And you don't even really have a whole big choice in that. So it's really important. So there's two types of triggers that you can have. There's external triggers and there's internal triggers. Well, what does that mean? Well, what that means is that the external triggers are the things outside of me, okay? So the external triggers could be people or situations, things environments that I could walk into, and all of a sudden I don't even realize it. So one of the triggers that somebody has told me before was a trigger to them, was an external trigger, was just seeing a ladder, just seeing a ladder. All of a sudden they had to be more aware of the ladders in their world, because they knew as soon as they saw a ladder, their brain would start trying to tell them to just have one. And I talked about this in the most recent podcast. See, that's what the brain will do to you. It's not going to tell you to have a large amount. Okay. It's not going to say, hey, I want you to go do a large amount of cocaine. I don't want you, it's not going to say, hey, I want you to drink a 30 pack. My brain always says, if it tries to attack me and it goes on this autopilot that I'm constantly having to be aware of, it says, have one. It just says, have one. And so all of a sudden, then I start selling that lie to myself that I'm not going to have a 30 pack. I'm not going to have a whole lot of whatever. I'm just going to have one. And so my brain has been triggered. I've lied to myself. I've fallen into the trap. And all of a sudden I put in one. Well, we always, the wonderful statement in recovery is one is too many and 1,000 is never enough, because one is not where it's going to stop. And 1,000 is not going to be where it ends, for many of us. So we have these external triggers, right? These people, these situations, these things we see, and we have to be aware of what they are. So if you're doing this for your counselor, I want you to write down 3 external triggers that you have. And I know many of us think, well, I don't have any triggers. Well, like I told you before, people that aren't even alcoholic and addict, they have triggers of some kind. It doesn't mean that that's going to be problematic for them, but it is something that prompts them to want to put in more often. So say they go to a party. Say it's a Christmas party. They go to a Christmas party. Well, they're more likely to have a drink. They're not alcoholic necessarily, but they're more likely to have a drink because that's the environment and that's what people are doing and that's what their brain says to do. Well, remember, with our reward system and our brain system and our physiology and what's happened is that it's more than that. It's more powerful than that. So we need to be aware of that. Okay. So write down 3 external triggers. Another thing that we have to look at is internal triggers. Well, what are internal triggers? Well, internal triggers really center more around the feelings that we have, okay? So you have to kind of look at what are the feelings that you have that could be considered internal triggers. So a lot of times what that is for us is stress. So one of the biggest things that we're going to deal with in our recovery and our addiction is anger and stress, okay? So remember, I'm going to talk about this every time. Recovery is an inside job. It's mental, emotional, and spiritual. So I have to learn how I respond to these things around me. And one of the things that I have to be really aware of are these things like that, like anger and stress. Well, I've read in one of the really great books written about addiction and recovery is that resentment is the #1 offender. It kills more alcoholics and addicts than anything else. Well, why is that? Because I don't know how to deal with the anger that I go through. So I'm going to break it down in another little side note here. So anger is never the primary emotion. I had a wonderful, wonderful teacher that taught me that one time. Anger is never the primary emotion, where you're like, what does that mean? Anger is never the primary emotion. Well, what I'm saying is that anger covers another emotion. So anytime you're experiencing resentment or anger, there's really something else under that. And I think that that's always been one of the problems that we had when we were drinking or using, that we didn't quite understand. Number one, I don't know how to deal with it. Number two, if you told me something like it's not a primary emotion, I'd go, what the heck are you talking about? And number three, I'm not really willing to delve into the conversation or the process of understanding what are the root emotions tied to that primary emotion. So you're starting to get it. So here's your anger, right? Or here's your anger, and it covers our primary emotion. Usually our primary emotions is some way that we're threatened. Some form of our life has been threatened in some way. It's probably based in fear. You're going to hear me talk about fear a lot. So I don't want to let you know that that's what's really going on with me. So I get angry at you, and that's my defense mechanism. That's telling you to go away. So I have to really watch out for my anger. Okay. So when I do get angry, I probably need to talk to somebody about it. Right. Um, if that's not the only way to do it, then another way to do it is to kind of go into exploration with myself. Why am I angry? What is it really going on? What is threatened here? Why am I afraid? And if I learn to process these things, it's about understanding more of how I tick. If I understand more about how I am and who I am, then I'm going to be more equipped to handle the world around me. So remember, when these things happen, I will rationalize and I will justify the techniques that I know that I use that work. So one of the techniques that we had, I'm going to circle right back around, is to put in. So all of a sudden, I'll start lying to myself. I'll say, or I'll give myself an excuse. It's been a long time. I can just handle a little. It's not going to be that big of a deal. And it takes a long time for those of us that are in recovery to understand at our fundamental core, the next one's not going to be any different. And that's hard to understand. Okay. And that's a process. And a lot of times we have to just keep doing the right thing, not even understanding that until ultimately it kind of sinks in and we get it. And so it's important that we understand that. So one of the other things that we have to understand in our recovery is that we have to learn to balance our life. So if I'm going to understand what these internal and external triggers are, I'm also going to have to understand how to balance my anger and my stress, right? So life and recovery is all about balance, right? It's all about balance. It's about making sure that I understand that I don't go too far up or too far down. One of the really wise men in recovery that I know, he said, we come in and our emotions are doing this. And he said, really what we're after is more of this. Little up, little down. And so that's about balance. And so it's important that I learn to maintain my stress, and I need to learn to maintain my anger when I'm in recovery and when I'm in life, so that I have a more balanced approach at the life around me and the day that I'm facing. So one of the tools that I want you to think about is, what can you do to manage your stress? Sometimes it's journaling, sometimes it's talking it out, sometimes it's a prayer life. Sometimes it's reading. Sometimes it's just taking my mind off the situation at hand until that emotional spike comes down, and all of a sudden I can address it a little more. So another tool that I'll tell you, or another educational point that I'll tell you is, what I was told is that, and I read it in a study one time, I believe it came out of Marquette University, is that the average trigger, so your brain lights up like a Christmas tree when you get triggered, right? And that could be stress, that could be anxiety, that could be fear, that could be guilt, that could be all sorts of things. So you see something, you get excited, you're like, ooh, a party, ooh, remember my client, the lighter, whatever it is. Your brain lights up like a Christmas tree, okay? And when it does that, one of the things that I can do is let that settle down. Well, the average individual, the trigger, the emotional, the cognitive response takes 15 minutes to settle down. And you're going to be more equipped to handle a better situation and a better decision after that process has occurred. So anytime you're triggered, remove yourself from the situation, allow at least 30 minutes. Because remember, the average person, 15 minutes. Well, I've never considered myself average, good or bad in any way. So I'm going to take a little more time to make sure that I let that emotional spike settle down. And then I'm going to incorporate some of these other tools, talking to somebody, writing about it, prayer life, something like that. Make sure that I get that balance in my life. Because what we're going to learn is, what we're going to understand is this concept that is super important, is that we understand what emotional sobriety is. So the other assignment I want you to do, if you're doing this for your counselor, write down the top 3 things that stress you in your life today. Okay. And so that's important to understand. And so if I'm aware of that, then when it comes up again, I'll be more equipped to handle those stresses in my life. So this emotional sobriety. So this was a term that started hitting the recovery community in the 1950s, and a little before, from what I understand. And so the original Aramaic and Hebrew translation of the word sober had nothing to do with chemical. It meant balanced mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. Okay. That's sober, right? That is emotional sobriety. So I understand that if I put in one drink or one drug, there's no chance for those 3 things to be balanced in my life. So remember, when we're dealing with these triggers and things like that, I have to give myself a chance for those things to settle down so I can be emotionally sober, right? Emotional sobriety. Because if it was really never about the drink or the drug, it's really about my internal response. It's really about my emotional sobriety. And so it's really important that that is the main thing that we seek and we go after in our recovery, is emotional sobriety. Emotional response has to be level in the way we look at the world around us. What you'll see is that over time, these people that, for good reason, they have difficulty trusting us with anything in their life, a whole lot of miracles may happen, and all of a sudden they start seeing you as the rock or the cornerstone in life and in an approach. And that's the really cool thing that's happened in not only my life, but a lot of people's lives and recoveries. And all of a sudden people start looking at us as like we're the one that's supposed to have the answer or the way to address the situation at hand. And it'll blow your mind when it happens, and it's really neat. And but you got to put in the work, and it's one day at a time, and it's one situation at a time. It's one moment when you get angry or one moment when you get stressed, but you need to know what makes you angry. You need to know what makes you stressed. You need to know how to deal with it, how to remove yourself from that situation. First of all, don't put yourself in that situation if you have any control over that. And a lot of times we do. But if we do end up in those situations, because it's life and it'll happen, remove yourself from that situation. Let those brain waves settle down. Start applying the other tools. Write about it. Talk to somebody. Pray about it. All sorts of things. And what you'll find is you'll have a better approach with the life around you. So hopefully these things were helpful. Look for more videos to come. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, anything, reach out to us at 409-622-9252. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram. If you're watching this for your counselor, you can talk to them. You can figure out, but give us some feedback. Let us know what you want to hear about. And I hope everybody had a wonderful and blessed weekend. And I look forward to talking to y'all again soon.